Hello ladies and gentlemen, Silent here, and I'm coming back with a second video about Sword Art Online Hollow Realization because I just recently beat the game when I was at Ricky's house. I had completed all of the actual content there is in the game. I haven't touched the final dungeon that you achieve after completing all of the main content, but as far as story content is concerned, it's pretty much all taken care of. The last part is really just for anybody who wants something extra to go through at the end of the game. It's supposed to be like a really crazy, hardcore, I think 1,000-floor dungeon. I think it's known as the Infinite Dungeon, even though there's a limit to it, so it's really quite finite, but you get the point here. That's the only thing I haven't touched in the game, but all the other content is taken care of. It took me about 160 hours in the game, and I think it was a little under 2 months ago that I had achieved the game and played it for the first time, so it's lasted me quite a while for no-lifing the game, and it's been a very enjoyable experience. So I'm going to use this video to go ahead and talk about the game itself in depth, and what to expect, especially later into the game. So I'm going to start with like pros here, just good stuff to look forward to if you're considering getting the game, and a lot of just generalized pros in general about the game, which will be great. And then the cons are going to be more specific and end-game stuff, more so than anything else. More about the actual mechanics in the game and the things that I really didn't like that were just fucking absolutely grating in the game. That'd be the best way to go about this, I would feel. So let me go ahead and pull up my notepad document here, and we'll go ahead and start reading based off of this. So, one of the first things I have for pros is, obviously, excellent combat system with a surprising amount of depth in it, and this was something I went over in my silent impression, so I can't really add much more to it. Though at the time I didn't know about self-skill chaining with yourself, though that isn't what SSC stands for here, but that's what it's known as in the game, SSC, which you can increase your maximum amount of that, which is the maximum amount of times that you can chain a sword skill with yourself off of another with proper timing. There's like a little blue flash that'll happen after using a sword skill, and when you use a different sword skill aside from the one that the animation triggered this blue flash, then you can continually go back and forth between two sword skills or more over and over and over again until you cap out on what your SSC max is, essentially. And it's really neat because the more that you tack these on to the end, the more damage that the sword skill will do, eventually, and designed to be ended with a finisher that does considerably more damage than most other sword skills in the game. Add that on to damage scaling with all the other stats in the game, and there's a lot of depth about gearing your character and setting yourself up to have, say, a high amount of agility with an agility scaling skill, essentially. Although most of the skills later in the game scale from multiple stats, so really what you want to do is just make sure that you can have gear that has stats in all of the things that they scale in, rather than being like a strength-specific character. But anyway, moving on from there, there's also a fair amount of charm to the game in its attention to detail. And this is more so found with the visual novel-esque part of the game and like the dating sim part of it. And even in just the environment itself, like there is just an interesting, I can't really go into specific detail about it until I go into other pros to explain what I mean here. So I'll just move on to the next one, which is that there is a lot of content in the game to keep you entertained for a while, assuming that you don't bore too easily, because it is going to be very repetitive. It is an RPG. Essentially, it is based off of grind and just killing mobs over and over and over again, which, thank God that they have a good combat system for that, because this would be fucking dreadful if the combat system was only passable. And to me, I would easily say this is an above-average combat system that works really, really well. Going on further from here, also, I have, if you enjoy the visual novel-esque side and dating sim elements of the game, then Sword Art Online Hollow Realization does a very solid job at this. It's not over-the-top, like, really amazing, awesome, excellent visual novel shit, but like, it's definitely not top-notch, but it is surprisingly really well done. And one of the ideas that I was pointing out earlier with attention to detail is the sillier things that you can do, like walking around town holding hands with your desired partner, which you can actually do online with other people as well. I can open up a online session, have my dad join in the game, and just walk around holding Streya's hand just because fuck you, which is pretty cool. And an above-average detail to the environments also counts as another part of the charm to the game as well. There's nothing super amazing about the worlds, but the ambiance changes are enough to keep you interested at the very least in the game, which is pretty neat. There's just enough change in the environment so that you're constantly seeing something slightly new as you progress throughout the game, throughout the worlds. It's got its snow level, its flame level, you know, the obligatory JRPG stuff and tropes that just go into pretty much any RPG game in general, and some of them are actually really cool looking in the game that gave me a very big Dark Cloud vibe for the PS2, which is awesome because it's one of my favorite games of all time, and I've mentioned this a multiple number of times. There's also a large amount of fairly solid boss fights and mechanics in the game. Again, nothing over the top crazy for boss mechanics, but they keep you engaged with what you're supposed to do with the boss, and a lot of times you can't just run in and just smack away at the boss without thinking about anything and expect to really get anywhere in a decent amount of time. There's also actual useful AI in the game that I especially love. Thanks to the attributes and the traits and stuff in the game, you can build an extensive palette of useful AIs for different things that you want them to do in the game. You can change the frequency of the skills in their classes to further modify what they're using, what they're not using, and essentially make them do just about anything that you need them to do in the game. It's not perfect, but it's pretty solid. In this case scenario, you can tell the whole entire party to evade, heal, or attack at different intervals, and utilizing the party skills properly is definitely essential to being able to take down a lot of things, especially later on in the game. So just finally all together here with all of the pros is just a pretty solid RPG experience that isn't very difficult as a whole, but it is rewarding to master all of the fine facets and details in the combat system as well, with all the gear and everything else. So it was pretty solid that way. Now to move over to the much larger cons section that I have here, ladies and gentlemen. So, alright, here we go. One of the first major cons is just don't even consider getting the game without DLC. That is just a no-no, don't. Like, it just, the main storyline to the game is passable. It's okay, it's pretty good, but it's not exactly worth an Oscar, and like, the Sword Art Online games that I've seen so far with Fatal Bullet in this, they're not exactly, like, super amazing storylines. They're good, and I can see why somebody would really like them, but they're not, like, super above average. They're not out of the norm. A lot of cliches are used and stuff like that, but that's kind of how anime is in a nutshell anyway. Some things are stretched to just make sense, even though they kind of don't. And just the content in the game, just the base game itself, is just very lackluster and way too easy. The game only became difficult for me when I actually touched the DLC in the game. So, just get the game with DLC if you're going to buy it. You will regret it otherwise. There's a lot more shit to the game when you get into that. That's the best way that I can put on for you to just explain that. And then the second con that I have here before we touch the combat system is one I already mentioned in the first video, which is that the character that you make is meant to be Kirito, which is an already existing main protagonist in the game. Now, I need to mention that you can disable the voice acting on your character in the options, which is great, but it still killed the immersion for me because I'm not, like, making my own decisions in the game. I'm not making my own choices or inserting my real-world consciousness or self imaginatively into the game or anything of the sort. I'm just essentially on rails as far as the story itself is concerned, which kind of just kills it for me. It's not super bad, but it could have been done better to me. If you're going to make a character design the way that they look, I don't understand why I need to be inserted as a template for an already existing protagonist. It kills it for me right there. So, let's go into the actual combat, because this is, like, a lot of shit right here that kind of aggravated me with the combat as well. So, first off, combat, like I said, it feels great and responsive. But one thing about it that was always off-putting to me, which is that, for one, you can miss a lot of your sword skills very frequently, even with the lock-on option. Considering that your character literally lunges towards your target 95% of the skills in the game, you will lunge towards what your target is without even using the lock-on. Like, there's no option to freely aim where you're attacking, where you're using your sword skills. But you still miss, even with that lock-on feature of the game. So you can imagine what my frustration is when I miss a sword skill that I have zero control over with aiming. It is awful. And it kills your combo multiplier when you do this, so you're not attacking the enemy, you're not building a combo, which kills your damage outputs, and ultimately just stops you from getting all of your combo hits in, which you need for unlocking other things in the game, and skill fusions and stuff for building your combos. And even worse, it can put you in your enemy's crosshairs and get you killed in the process because you'll lunge out in front of them and get hit when they were going after the tank. So, just, yeah, it's not fun. It is not fun. Part 2 to the combat annoyances as well is that enemies in this game have a really strange fucking fascination with climbing up walls, and their collision isn't exactly the same that you and your party members have, so they can essentially climb up on any rock, any wall, or any obstruction at all in the environment, in the world, like they're a goddamn billy goat. And then you can't touch them when they do this. Combine this with flying enemies that they add in with all of the DLCs, and you get a recipe for a lot of unnecessary fucking frustration, especially if you accidentally bind the bastards, and then send the mob hurtling backwards up a wall. Which leads to my third fucking pet peeve about the combat: knockback. Holy fucking hell, the knockback in this game is completely fucking unnecessary. Why can't at least the mini-bosses and the HNMs in the game just be immune to the knockback? Like, just look at the fight on screen right here and you can see exactly what I'm talking about, okay? There's a clear benefit to attacking mobs from behind in this game while someone else in your party tanks. But I can't even backstab this fucker for half of the fight, at least, just because I'm too busy pushing his nose into the wall until he turns around. And again, bind makes this even worse, because the mob won't follow you if you tell your if you command your party to regroup. The mob can't move because they're bound based off of just the innate properties of binding enemies. Anyway, yeah, it's awful. Another con to the system in which... yeah, that's all of my combat cons, actually, right there. So that's all of the combat shit right there. Knockback is just terrible. So let's move on to the other part of the game that was absolutely gross and disgusting to me, which was the legendary weapons system. Now, there are essentially only two ways to obtain legendary weapons in this game. There's the intended way, which is an absolute unnecessary ball ache, and then there's the exploitative way that literally everybody who plays this fucking game takes advantage of. So, to get a legendary weapon, what you need to do is you need to find the base item type, of which you need, and it serves as a catalyst in a transformation chain that will eventually reward you with one of 3 different legendary weapons in the game. Each path above it is slightly more powerful and even more costly, and you'll need the most expensive of the 3 if you wish to complete Enigma orders in the game, which are used to obtain even more powerful weapons that break the limits of a 3rd tier legendary. These legendaries, by the way, these and the Enigma Order weapons, they're not needed to go through the game. You can very well get the 3rd DLC weapons and armor in the game and just upgrade them to +9, and you should be fine for pretty much any of the content, maybe aside from the Infinite Dungeon, so you really don't need the legendaries, but the fact of the matter is that they're legendary weapons. They're shiny, they're gold, they're better than everything else in the game. It's a loot-heavy game as it is. Every RPG gamer is going to obviously want to aim for the legendaries, and they're a ball ache to do. So why are they a ball ache to do exactly? Well, in order to get the materials needed to create a legendary weapon, what you need to do is get quite a bit of cash and quite a bit of time to grind the materials. Now, ordinarily, this isn't something that I would protest, but add in a 0.0001% fucking chance to drop on an item that I need 50 of, then I have a problem. Many RPG games use RNGesus to decide whether or not that you're worthy of obtaining that shiny new piece of gear that you really want, and it's fucking deplorable to me. Trust me, when you're a computer programmer, you hate RNG even more because you know how lazy that it is to code it into the game. In most situations, it's usually only a line or two of code, and that's it. 2 lines of code. That is all that is decided whether or not you get the shiny thing that you need in order to progress in the game. That's a problem to me. That is a big problem to me. And don't even get me started about the things that you need for the legendaries in this game specifically. Okay, I've spent literally 2 hours on this game in the past just getting the 50 insectoid gold wings that you need for one of the early transformations. Don't even get me started on the 10 demonic remains that you need later on. And when I have over 1,000 drops of every other drop that you can get from a bee, before I have even 30 rare drops out of the 50 with a maximized drop rate increased from buffs and potions when I'm killing about 100 mobs every 3 to 6 minutes, no, this is no exaggeration, then it gets ridiculous. Seriously, look up how to grind for insectoid gold wings in Sword Art Online Hollow Realization, and watch any of the videos on how to exploit world events to infinitely spawn the bees. Look at how many enemies that you kill. This still takes over an hour to get 50 drops. Literally. Anyway, the other way that people obtain these legendary weapons is through recycling and abusing the cross-save feature in the game. And while these are both intended features of the game, absolutely, it is still 100% exploitative and illegitimate. I'm not going to cut corners here, I'm going to be honest with you, as I always am with this shit. It's exploitative to do these things. It is not a full 100% intended purpose for you to be able to complete the game this way, considering that there's autosave in the game. And there's a literal term for this called save scumming, where I'm getting tongue-tied here. It's to describe an exploit of loading and saving your game continually until you get your desired result that you want out of the game. Essentially, you only need one set of materials for your legendaries, which you get for literally nothing when you get the DLCs for the game anyway. And the process is that you just upload your save to the cross-save cloud in the menu before you start your transforming. You go to your desired blacksmith, usually Basara, spelt Basara if you look into your friends list in the game, since he has the highest recycling rate in the game, and then you transform through him, making sure that you get refunded materials every step of the way. And then you upload your save when you feel comfortable doing so. I usually do it every 2 or 3 transformations. And of course, load if you fuck up and lose any of the items when you transform. The only thing you really need to worry about at this point is just making sure that you have the money to pay for the process. I don't feel the slightest bit guilty about using this exploit because I wanted to put legendaries on my party members, but I gave up on this because of how ridiculous it was to get legendaries, and I tried to get them the legitimate way. So I got my first 3 legendaries in the game perfectly, legitimately, without doing the cross-save exploit in any way, shape, or form. So just doing it the old-fashioned way, though, is just completely asinine, especially when you take into account gearing up your allies. But anyway, there you go, ladies and gentlemen. That about summarizes in detail the things that you should know about the game if you're considering getting it, etc. The only other cons that I can imagine here are the ones that I mentioned in my impression video, which is basically just saying about how the visual novel/anime part of the game could be very off-putting. There's just a lot of dialogue in this game, ladies and gentlemen, and some of us just don't have the fucking time to hit the X button for 5 minutes straight when we just want to beat something up, you know what I'm saying? So, again, yes, that goes through the fine details of later on in the game, the end game, and the other things that you might be worrying about when you actually dedicate a large amount of time in the game. Really, the good part of the game is enjoying the boss fights, getting powerful enough to be able to deal your first HNMs and get the good green gear in the game, and just experiencing what the rest of the DLCs have to offer beyond that point when you get yourself geared with HNM weapons and armor from all of your sacrament dungeons and all that other stuff, and just going through the gear progression system in the game. Like, it is a lot of fun, and there's a lot of content here, but you need the DLCs to do it, so get the DLCs if you're going to get the game. I can't justify putting $60 into the game plus DLC prices if you guys are really considering getting it, unless you really enjoy Sword Art Online. I'd wait until it was on a sale or something like that before you do it. I got everything that I needed for about like $20, and it was great, so take it easy, ladies and gentlemen. I will see you later on. I plan to make more videos about this that go into some of the things that people don't talk about on forums, that you can't really find information for anywhere else, just because some people might need that information later on down the line, because I know that I fucking did. So, take it easy, guys. I will see you later. Ciao.